Okay, so welcome to our now Tuesday night Exploring Buddhism. So a couple of you previously came on when it was on Mondays, not Mondays, Fridays, the other end of the week. So this year we're starting with having it on Tuesday nights, going back to the tradition of having Tuesday night teachings, see how we go with that. And so this whole program of Exploring Buddhism, just to reiterate, is a pilot program currently of FPMT, a intermediate program, which is above the foundation programs of, like, you know, discovering Buddhism and Buddhism in a nutshell, and then in between that and basic program to provide some linkage and so forth. So this is being trialled, and it's expected that by the middle of the year, the course will be, you know, having had enough trials throughout the past year and a half, by then 2 years, that the material's all coming together nicely. So we're trialing it out. So we have done here previously 2 of the modules, which was exploring the mind and exploring meditation. And the next module, although in this pilot period, you don't have to follow, and I had some recommendations to leave out one, and people said, no, they want that one, so I didn't leave it out. What I have skipped is the exploring the truths. And the reason for that was at the beginning of last year, and appreciating not everybody's the same bodies coming along, we did cover the 4 Noble Truths and the Wheel of Life, which basically makes up the core. We covered the 2 truths, 4 Noble Truths and the Wheel of Life, which basically is covered in that topic. So I feel that that's been covered in recent history, although we have to hear the teachings again and again and again, as we all know. So I don't know if you've received, and it's okay if you've received the documents I sent out, just with like a course, like the slides for tonight, and I think just tonight. And then, in other words, the content, the course notes, and there's a chart of the Lam Rim 3 scopes, and also was a sheet that says homework questions. So at this point in time, one is not required to complete homework. Take them as reflection or points for discussion, particularly points for debate, all up for points to debate. So did people receive that? Yes. Yes. Okay. So so tonight, just starting with overview in relation to the Lam Rim, and to initiate that, starting with some quotes from Lama Zopa Rinpoche at the Light of the Path retreat, the first one in September 2009. Somehow I've been very fortunate so far to go to all of the retreats, Lamp of the Path, without even planning mostly to go. Just happened. But this year, just to mention, it'll be at Kopan, and I think being broadcast. Now we're all in the world of Zoom. I think so. As Rinpoche says, it's very worthwhile, the Lam Rim, to attend a Lam Rim course. He's saying this at the beginning of a Lam Rim course. If you're like me, Rinpoche is saying, the mind is occupied with other things, and there is no time to meditate on the Lam Rim, the real meditation. The real meditation on the Lam Rim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, there's no time for that. And, you know, Rinpoche is indicating that we have to, as Westerners, we have to have realizations, not just study, but have realizations of the Lam Rim. Otherwise, the Dharma is going to disappear in the world. So Rinpoche's made this point quite strongly that, you know, we can't rely on the Tibetan lamas who are dying off or so forth, or as Rinpoche puts it, you know, aging and so forth. And we can see just in recent years how many of the great lamas have passed. And so, but also we need the realizations ourselves to progress on the path. Of course, that's on the basis of study. So at this very first Light of the Path retreat, we would have discussion group after lunch. And there was one gentleman in my discussion group who absolutely came every day for a discussion group. At the end of the retreat, you know, a month later, you've made good friends. He, you know, farewelled him off onto the bus into town to catch another bus home. Between those two buses, he walked across the road and was knocked over by a car and died. However, the conversations before that were, do I need to go and see Lama Zopa Rinpoche about what to do now? Because he had just finished a 1-year-long Lam Rim retreat. You know, he was in his 60s, he was retired, he had time on his hands, and he thought, that's okay, I know what to do, I'll just do another year. And so that was his thought, and left the retreat like that. I mean, I think if you're going to go, what better mind state to be in? So we never know when that's going to happen, do we? And then Rinpoche's pointing, you know, maybe you're doing more Tantra meditation, because of course, those of us who have tantric empowerments might have commitments. So we're going to engage in those, but also indicating we might be more attracted to doing those, but not Lam Rim in terms of the meditations. It's saying your interest is in the Tantra meditation, but not on the Lam Rim. However, as Rinpoche says, it is extremely worthwhile here. And so in terms of taking whatever knowledge of the stages of the path to enlightenment, whatever we've learned, whatever outlines that we have, taking them into a retreat. Rinpoche's also made it very easy in terms that we now have the Lam Rim yearbook, which is day by day reflections from either Lama Zopa Rinpoche or Lama Yeshe, quotes from them with reflections on each of the topics. And so you can do that over a whole year. Think Losar, the Tibetan New Year's next week, what a good place to start, where it's actually structured for you how many days or months to spend on Guru devotion, how many to spend on appreciating the precious human rebirth, etc. And it's just all laid out. We can go topic by topic by topic. And then as Rinpoche says, then start again. And Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives has it's called a companion or something like that page where you can actually, you know, if it works for you, some people say, I went there and it's just the same material, but it's a check box to say, yes, I've done today's meditation, if we need to check off on ourselves, but also it's cross-linked to Pabonka Rinpoche, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, the topics. So it's cross-referencing to there. Just saying, we're getting more and more and more and more commentaries. So continuing on from Rinpoche, Pabonka Dechen Yingpo, so the composer of Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which was a 24-day Lam Rim teaching based on the Great Treatise of the Path to Enlightenment, based on Lama Rinpoche's Lamp on the Path to Enlightenment. So that being a teaching that Pabonka Rinpoche gave in 1921. And so he's like the teacher of our teachers. Trijang Rinpoche was there and translated, and he's, you know, Trijang Rinpoche, one of the root guru of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and so forth. So we can see that, you know, put that in context. So Pabonka Rinpoche's great enlightened being mentioned that even somebody who has recited Om Mani Padme Hum many hundreds of millions of mantras, like even someone's done that, life is more meaningful to meditate on the Lam Rim. So Rinpoche is not saying it's not good to recite you know, hundreds of millions of Om Mani Padme Hums. For example, his own mother would recite 50,000 a day. So I did the calculation. I let the calculator do that. That was nearly 8 1/3 or 8 1/2 hours a day. So it's almost like this is your job, right? Doesn't mean she was doing it 8 hours straight. Maybe she did chunks and so forth. And then Rinpoche tells the story of her. So she didn't do the study, right? But she, as many Tibetans, didn't do, unless they were in the monasteries or the nunneries, do the studies, but did, she was dedicated to reciting on Mani Padme Hung. Of course, Rinpoche gave her many instructions, like one bead at a time. Don't jump the beads. Make sure you count. Anyway, so, and then Rinpoche told the story of his mother's reincarnation. So was reincarnated as a boy who Rinpoche had plans for him and was advising where he should go to study, and they had, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche had a manager, so his manager, his sort of go-to, was sending him somewhere else. Meantime, he was outside and he tripped on the stone step, cracked his head and died. So he didn't go to either place. Again, we don't know, do we? That was some years ago that Rinpoche told that, so it hasn't given an indication of the next reincarnation. So one can go a long way reciting on Mani Padme Hung, as Rinpoche says. You recite 10 malas a day, any being that touches the air on your skin. You go into the water, any beings in the water get blessed, and so forth. Extensive benefit. However, Rinpoche is here encouraging us to study and meditate on the Lamrim, gain the realizations. As Rinpoche says, to meditate on that, on the 3 principles of the path, is more meaningful than reciting hundreds of millions of mantras. So we talk about the 3 principles of the path, which also is one of the other texts, one text, shorter text by Lama Tsongkhapa. So the 3: renunciation, bodhicitta, and correct view. So Pabonka Rinpoche also quotes Gyaltsub-je, one of the 2 close disciples of Lama Tsongkhapa, saying in the context, first, due to your study, your thinking becomes realistic. Because of your realism, you will gain prime wisdom into the purest matters. So, encouraging to study. He says that meditating on the Lamrim is more meaningful to see than seeing a Buddha. I think quite a lot of us would be very delighted to see a Buddha directly. By seeing a Buddha, you don't become enlightened without meditating on a Lamrim. So it doesn't do it, does it? You have to then get all the teachings. We think even Arya Asanga, who, 12 years retreat to want to be able to see, connect with Maitreya face to face, and not going through the whole story, but 12 years retreat. And then when he finally did see Maitreya, it was out of his compassion for this dog that he saw that had maggots on it, and he had compassion for them, and was sticking it, cut up a bit of his thigh and put it there for the maggots, and sticking out his tongue to gently lift the maggots over there, and opened his eye. No dog, no maggots. There's Maitreya. So without going through the whole story, because it can get quite lengthy, after an interchange between them, Maitreya took Arya Sangha then up to Tushita heaven to give all the 5 great treatises of Maitreya, Ornament of Clear Realizations, Ornament Mahayana Sutras, and so forth, so that he got the extensive teachings. So he had seen Maitreya, but he didn't have the complete teachings. right? So on a more, shall I say, less profound level, on a more ordinary, is it ordinary? Can't really say it's ordinary, but I've thought of people who, from their side, would have not studied at all and who have nonetheless some exchange with a Buddha, apparently. For example, I was visiting for a couple of years, Margaret Olley, which ended up being the last couple of years of her life. And, you know, she'd say, she had a statue of Green Tara. And she'd say, you know, Tara talks to me. And I'd say, yeah, what does she say? She never told me anything she said. So, but she had that sense of, you know, having a connection, direct connection there. So as a, you know, a mind of faith. She was never declared herself a Buddhist, though, you know, some of the things she said were very Buddhist. And of course, we like to frame things like that. There was also a student from Sydney who was with a friend in Dharamsala, not Buddhist, who was granted an interview with the Dalai Lama, right? And she went off for this interview and came back and he goes, well, how was that? And she said, it was amazing. I saw this creature with 1,000 arms, you know. Chenrezig is what she saw. Okay. She might not have said 1,000 arms. She might have just said a lot of arms. I don't think she necessarily sat there counting the arms, but that's what she saw. A little bit different to those of us who might wish to see that, but maybe we impose one on the other slightly. All right. So as Lama Zopa says, you have to have the realizations. Just seeing a Buddha is not going to do it. The delusions don't just go like that. It's not like you see a Buddha, delusion's gone. We know that takes a lot. Even we're working at it, you know, it takes a lot. So you have to have the realization of guru devotion, the route of the path to enlightenment, and that makes it possible to have all the other realizations up to enlightenment. So we know that from, you know, the foundation of all good qualities, Lama Tsongkhapa's most concise Lamrim text, 14 verses, you know, the foundation of all good qualities, kind and venerable guru, correct devotion to him is the root of the path, and so forth. So we know that we need to have a spiritual guide, a spiritual teacher when we seriously want to study and practice, put that into practice. So the realization of guru devotion, though, itself is not easy, right? Really. We have all sorts of, unfortunately, contaminated ideas and so forth, things that get in the way. So I was at Kopan and it was during the November course, and in the little mud slab 5-room place I was staying. I don't know if that's still there. Anyone been to Kopan recently? You've been recently? Is that mud slab? Is that mud, you know, down from behind the stupa, down. Anyway, there's a row of 5 single rooms, but like mud slab rooms. I don't think they.
If it's on the Kathmandu side of the hill,
yeah.
No, there's not much there now.
Okay.
They've got the new Chenrezig.
Yeah, they've got the new Chenrezig gone for and all of that. Anyway, I seriously doubt it would still be there. But anyway, I was at one end and this guy was at the other end, so I'd hear him doing his practice every morning. And he was in silence the whole time and keeping silence, so I didn't get to talk to him till a month later. So he'd just come out of retreat. Lama Lundrup, who was the abbot of Kopan at the time, had sent him off to do Lamrim retreat, and he thought he was going for 4 months. Anyway, he said, well, 4.5 years later, when I had to leave because of visa issues, I hadn't got past the first topic, guru devotion. But you could say in 4.5 years, you'd have some depth of understanding, because nobody's going to talk about what realizations they had, but that you have some depth of understanding that, say, those of us who haven't done 4 years on Guru devotion haven't got. So one could just take that topic, and if it is the root of the path, by just focusing on that topic, we can say the Guru is going to guide us all the rest of the way. You know? All the realizations up to enlightenment, renunciation of the delusions, in particular attachment, then the right view, realizing emptiness, which eliminates ignorance, then bodhicitta, which eliminates the self-cherishing thought. So it's interesting in the way that Rinpoche is putting the order of the 3 principles of the path. He's going renunciation, right view, and bodhicitta. We could say that that more closely maps to the 3 scopes of the Lam Rim, if we look at, you know, the common shared practices for realization of emptiness. Yeah, so as Rinpoche said, we need all of these, and to actualize generation stage and completion stage, so Tantra. And so in relation to Tantra, it is included in some Lam Rim texts, but not all. So, for example, Lama Tsongkhapa did a whole separate treatise on Tantra. Then, you know, the 3 volumes of Lam Rim Chenmo, the great treatise on the path to enlightenment. So he kept it as separate, except it is there in Foundation of All Good Qualities, a few verses on Tantra, you know, having completed the common path and then going on. So, okay. So let's look at what is covered in the 3 scopes, each of the scopes, or before. So I don't know if you have the chart that I sent out. That's okay. You can refer to it later, and perhaps you have some familiarity. So we talk about the 3 scopes as 3 different levels of being, 3 capable beings or capacity, but it's really about what we're talking about. The graduated path to enlightenment is how we progress from where we are before now, even before having met a spiritual teacher, before having had any of the teachings, let's say, and then how we get from there up to Buddhahood. So it's actually, while it's divided into these 3 scopes, it's actually divided according to the progression of one individual, you know, one, you know, that we can progress through each stage, you know. So before that, before we even enter any of those 3 stages, we need a spiritual teacher. We need to know what qualities we're looking for. We need how to rely on a spiritual teacher. And then we need an appreciation of this precious human rebirth, and learn, you know, about what are the qualities of it, not just being born human, but being born human with all the conditions and interests and freedoms from states of being that wouldn't allow us to engage with the Dharma, etc. So we need to have that as, you know, motivating factors really to launch us into, you know, progressing along the path to enlightenment. Okay, so we have this initial scope or lower scope. Sometimes it says lesser capable beings. Some of the translations, I find that a very awkward translation, because it's not necessarily lesser capable. As the Buddha taught, Buddha was able to see what beings were, you know, what they were ready for at any point in time. It's like, you know, you don't teach post-grad to kids in kindy. You know, you sort of gradually build up and gradually build up and gradually build up. So I like to think of these scopes as like widening a scope focus on a camera. So you sort of like, you start there and then you go wider and then you go huge, right? So you go like that. So the initial scope or lower scope meditations, generally, having already done those on relying on a spiritual teacher and appreciating our precious human rebirth, is meditating on death, impermanence. That's a sort of first introduced. Then being introduced to the suffering of lower realms, the hell realms, etc., that we hear the stories of those at the beginning of the Kopan courses in the early days when Lama Zopa Rinpoche would spend 3 weeks, you know, graphically describing the lower realms. And just as people, apparently we here were about to leave, Lama Yeshe would come in at night and buoy people up or grab them back to stay. That's stories I've heard. But to recognize why are we, it is to instill fear, but it's still a fear of, this is on the basis of, the lower scope is on the basis of, I want to have a rebirth, at least as good as I have now, if not better. In other words, a human rebirth or a God realm rebirth, we could say higher rebirth. So, particularly in relation to the human realm, to continue on with the teachings. And so there's a motivation then for the next life, the suffering of the lower realm. So, and then on the basis of not wanting to go to lower realms and hearing about the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, you know, then we take refuge. Then we get teachings on karma, and to be able to engage in the main practice of this scope, which is refraining from non-virtue and engaging in virtue. In other words, ethical discipline. So ethical discipline's the core of the initial scope. This is one of the qualities that says sort of given us this precious human rebirth in the first place, having engaged in ethical discipline in past lives, but most likely in the context of having taken vows before. For us here, most likely we've taken Mahayana vows before, Bodhisattva vows and so forth, because where do we find ourselves? There's no mistake, you know. And so that's really the concerns of the initial scope being, is striving for a good rebirth. And then the intermediate scope, so you could say still not ready to let go of all the pleasures of being in samsara, which is being with these desires and angers and jealousies and pride and all our toxic emotions, deluded states of mind. So we haven't let go of that, but we, you know, going for the best possible next outcome. And then the middle scope is meditating. Generally, it's presented as meditating on the Four Noble Truths, but actually it's more specifically on the first two truths, the truth of suffering and the truth of origin of suffering, because they're the things that we want to relinquish. And but even though they're the main things, without the hope of the First Noble Truth and the way to do that, the path, very difficult. So they're the core teachings there on the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination. So that's the, you know, wanting to attain liberation. I've had it with samsara. There's nowhere pleasant anywhere in this whole of this cycle of existence. I'm done with it. I want to get out of here. And it's possible, right? So both of these scopes are for the individual, focus on the individual, and then the great scope, of course, the practice of bodhicitta and meditating on bodhicitta, 7-point cause and effect, coming from Arya Asanga, and we're all coming from the Buddha, but in terms of holding that lineage. And Shantideva, Bodhisattva's way of life, goes into detail on the exchanging, equalizing and exchanging self with others. And then we have the combination of those. And then meditating not engaging in the actions of the 6 perfections. And so the aim of that is Buddhahood. And of course, on top of that, we have to engage in Tantra. We've got to complete that. Okay. All right. So that's in brief. So just to go back a bit and look at the context of the Lam Rim, the genre of the Lam Rim, the history of the Lam Rim. Of course, it's all a comprehensive collection of the Buddha's teachings, but it expounds the stages of the path, as we've said, of the 3 scopes, which leads the student from the lower stages with the orientation on the individual to the great scope, the Mahayana great individual who aspires to benefit all living beings. So therefore, needing to attain Buddhahood. So mainly we associate this with Lama Atisha Dipankara Jnana. So we'll go into that in a little while. I'll come back to that. And just so we have Lama Atisha, then we have the whole Kadampa tradition coming from Lama Atisha down to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then Lama Tsongkhapa on the basis. So we have all the Kadampa masters, and we hear about the, Geshe Potoa, Geshe Showa, all the Geshis of that, Geshe Langri Tangpo, and so forth. So the prototype, the main textual base is the Lamp of Path to Enlightenment, which has its own history, which we'll go into a bit. And then I've mentioned the series, some of Lama Tsongkhapa's treatises. So the most extensive being the Lam Rim Chenmo, Great Treatise on the Path to Enlightenment, where indeed he also, particularly in the final volume, so it's 3 volumes, 3 sort of thickish volumes, where he also looks at, particularly in relation to the correct view of looking at different predecessors and so forth, and looking at how refined their views were and where there were qualms raised, and really refining the view. And so it's set up in a way of a debate in that volume. It's, yeah. So, and then I've mentioned, and then there's the middling Lam Rim, and the concise ones, the 3 principles of the path, a hymn of experience, which we're using here, and the 3 principles of the path, which we'll also use here a bit later on in this course. And then, of course, the foundation of all good qualities, which is an easy one to learn off by heart. And then you've got your Lam Rim in your mind, and then it'll continue all the time. Of course, there's slight translations, like the latest version, latest English version, which is only a couple of changes and moving words around. But it's still, if you when you learn something and you've got used to that particular sequence of things, then it's like, trips you up a bit. But thankfully, Lama Zopa likes to keep us all fresh and on our toes. You mentioned liberation in terms of commentaries, liberation, the palm of your hand. There's Geshe Zopa Rinpoche's 5-volume Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, the purple and, not purple, maroon and gold one. Illuminating the Path to Enlightenment by His Holiness is also, it combines a commentary on the Hymn of Experience, when it's called Hymn of Experience. Now, in the time that I've been a student. I think it started out Lines of Experience, then Song of Experience, and now Hymn of Experience currently. It's all the same text. And the idea is a Song of Experience or Hymn of Experience in particular are indicators that this has arisen as a what do you call realization out of the mind of the composer. So Lama Tsongkhapa, for example, in the Hymn of Experience says, I, a yogi, have practiced like this. You who desire liberation should practice also. In other words, this is how to do it. Except our latest translation on that is slightly different. It's turning it around the other way. You, the perfect guru, practice in this way. So it's like speaking to the guru. You, the perfect guru, practice in this way. I, who am seeking likewise, will also practice in this way. Well, it's making it that you put yourself in there, you know, that, okay, I got to practice in this way. I think when Geshe Dzogpa taught on the heart spoon, like the Bonka Rinpoche as well, that's what he did, is say, just every time, not you, say me, say I, me, make it your own so that you bring it into your heart. Yeah. Okay. So we have many other commentaries. You know, one of the favorites that I have on the Hymn of Experience is the Essence of Refined Gold, which in the later, then it was Path of Enlightenment, and now it's Refining Gold. So this is His Holiness the Third Dalai Lama commentary, and then His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama's commentary on that. I just love that text. And it's also good to like cross-reference different texts, like the other, since this one, like Yangtze Rinpoche, who's the director of Matripa College in Portland, FP&T HQ, and so he I think it's 2005 published his Practicing the Path, which is also a commentary in the great treatise, The Path to Enlightenment. So I like to put them both side by side, these two, because they both have an index. You know, we're getting all these texts that don't have indexes. It seems to be going out of favor or something. I like a good index. And if you want the whole extant, the Jamchub Lamrim website, so His Eminence Ling Rinpoche requested His Holiness to give the Jamchub Lamrim teaching. So it's classic 18 texts, and then all the commentaries on that. And if you go on that website, there's just a mass of all commentaries and so forth that you can just find on there, or links to other ones. So we can spend lifetimes on this, is what I'm saying. In the basic program, you spend a year on the Lamrim. That's just the study side. Okay. Right. So coming back to the three scopes. So this is coming from Lamp on the Path to Enlightenment, from Atisha. So that in the I'm not quoting the first verse, but basically in the first verse, he is indicating, he's praising Jamchub who was the one that requested the teachings, and not so much because he requested or because of, he was an important person, but because of the questions that needed to be clarified in Tibet. So he could see that he was raising these questions, and for, because there was a lot of confusion at the time about the Dharma. So then the second verse, so then he goes on to describe the different capable beings. So in general, understand that there are three kinds of persons. Because of their small, middling, and supreme capacities, I shall write clearly distinguishing their individual characteristics. Know that those who, by whatever means, seek for themselves no more than the pleasures of cyclic existence are persons of the least capacity. Okay. So those refers to anyone. Whatever means is all the different methods they can use, relying on ethics, abandoning the non-virtues, purification, so forth. So whoever relies on these various methods just for themselves has set their goal, as it says, no more than the pleasures of cyclic existence. So the first line gives the characteristics of the means, as referring to the means that anyone can do, anyone who's interested can do. It's not saying anyone who's committed to investigating, learning the Dharma, learning the Lamrim, and so forth. But they're, limited. So they're not just, they're limited, but they're not just concerned for the affairs of this life. They are concerned about future lives. And there are many methods they'll follow to gain a higher rebirth. And their motivation or intention, as in the second line, it says, seek for themselves. So the goal is individual. This is, I'm seeking these practices for myself. So their motivation isn't to be able to pass it on to others, and they may well do that, but that's not the motivation of their practice. So they're still stuck within cyclic existence, and this is what's described as the person of least capacity or the lowest scope. So briefly defining or characterizing that person is someone who's not attached to this life, but is still seeking the pleasures of a higher rebirth. And so, as we said, the practices for them is meditation on death, impermanence, suffering, particularly in relation to the lower realms, going for refuge, understanding the law of cause and effect, and abstaining from knowing the difference between non-virtues and virtues, and abstaining from non-virtues. Okay. And then we have back to Lama Atisha. Those who seek peace for themselves alone, turning away from worldly pleasures and avoiding destructive actions, are said to be of middling capacity. So we said those of middling capacity are those investigating the Four Noble Truths, contemplating the wheel of life, and the goal being personal liberation. So again, so peace for themselves alone is what we would describe as the result of nirvana is peace. So nirvana, or lower nirvana, we would say from our point of view, because we're talking about full enlightenment, so it's not full enlightenment. So again, it's their personal peace. And generally it is said that you arrive in this, you have a direct perceptual realization of emptiness, that you've overcome the afflictive states of mind. You have a direct insight into reality, and it's very blissful, and you stay in that state of bliss until sometime later a Buddha comes along and taps you on the shoulder and says, enough bliss and emptiness already, up you go, more to do. However, that's maybe not how it happens, because if you think that that this 3 scopes are put together as the practice for one individual, then you can see as you progress, we can see, oh, there's more, there's more, there's more, just as the Buddha did. So turning away from worldly pleasures, it's their thoughts, intentions, not at all caught up with worldly concerns, either of this life or any future lives, none of the samsaric pleasures, thank you very much. And then avoiding destructive actions. So again, ethical discipline. They avoid the non-virtues, body, speech, and mind. And, remain engaged in any of the level of vows of individual liberation. So whether that's the 5 pratamoksha vows, whether that's the different levels of ordination, the pratamoksha vows are the different levels of ordination. So they abide in those. And to let go of attachment is where we look at the 12 links, and we look at the whole, the wheel of life and the whole of samsara, down from the hottest hell of Avicii up to the peak of existence, and look at the sufferings and contemplate the different types of suffering that are extensively presented in the Lam Rim. And having looked at that, turning away from that, saying, I've had enough of that already. So I've had enough. I don't want any more. So Geshe Sharawa says that avoiding destructive actions is not just about not engaging in non-virtues. It's avoiding all afflictive karma. And if we say that while we're in samsara, we are always going to have afflictions, right? So that it's always going to be contaminated, aggregates, whilst ever. And so remember Geshe Tenzin Temples, from Institute Lama Tsongkhapa saying, we've all got to the peak of existence. All of us have been there. And so why are we still here? Because we haven't let go of that self-grasping, innate self-grasping. Okay. Be enough there. And then the next one, those who, through their personal suffering, truly want to end completely all the suffering of others are persons of supreme capacity. So we say supreme, great, Mahayana, same. So here, that those refers to those who've already travelled, are trained very well on the lower scope and the medium scope, and that it means they've generated a mind of renunciation. And so if you can think about us with a Mahayana motivation, having generated a mind of renunciation, doesn't mean we've given up all our worldly concerns. We may not yet have spontaneous renunciation, uncontrived renunciation, but we're training in that. So that thought of renunciation or definite emergence, that I definitely don't want to stay in samsaric conditioning, and I know it's possible not to do that. So yesterday I went to the memorial service that was held here for the Chinese Mahayana master, Venerable Master Xing Yun, and at Fo Guang Shan Temple. live streamed from Taiwan. And, you know, after his like 70 years of devotion to, well, maybe longer, at least 70 years, he was 96, 70 plus years, devotion to, as a teacher, as a Mahayana teacher and spreading the Dharma internationally for the benefit of all, very much to that. And he said, really, that for him, the most exquisite part of it, you know, part of that is the renunciation. It's a freedom, it's a liberation, totally free of all that stuff we want to be free of, and mainly totally free of the afflictive states of mind. So I noticed, you know, when you see photos of him as he goes on in life, you know, he's getting older and so forth, he's just like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, this beaming Buddha, you know, there's this complete beaming Buddha glowing at you. So that freedom that comes, we restrict ourselves. We say what these things are not possible. I can't, and all of that. I can't achieve enlightenment. I can't possibly do this or that. And we put the stops on ourselves. And once you realize there's space there, there's huge space. So everything is possible. Realization of emptiness says everything's possible. So those of great capacity, having generated the mind of renunciate, can tolerate any suffering within our continuum. Those who through their personal suffering indicates having previously trained, then that becomes a condition for training on the great scope, particularly if we're saying we're going to take on, you know, relieving the suffering of all sentient beings, not just our own. And so if we can't tolerate our own suffering, there's no way in the world that we can tolerate the suffering of others. So here it is, truly wanting to end completely all the suffering of others are persons who, through their own personal suffering, are of supreme capacity. So able to not just say, oh, phew, I've been liberated, feel, you know, at peace, but not bearing to see the suffering. So we go through all the afflictive obscurations, knowledge obscurations, and imprints, and truly wanting it, that this is a strong conviction, you know, that we completely want to stop suffering and its causes for all others and attain Buddhahood. So in essence, the practice for those of supreme capacity of the great scope, first generate the mind of bodhicitta using 7-point cause and effect, or equalizing, exchanging self with others, and then to train in the 6 perfections, and then to train in Tantra. Although we don't necessarily, you know, some of those things in actuality we might be doing simultaneously. It's okay, it's not a contradiction. So any questions, comments, so forth, so far? Okay. So we'll go on to introduce the hymn of experience. So here we've got to outline that the first 5 verses are verses of homage, that traditionally at the start of a text anyway, there's verses of homage which indicate who the homage is being paid to. For example, in Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the path to enlightenment, he pays homage to Lama Atisha, saying that Lama Atisha is in fact the author of the text which Lama Tsongkhapa wrote. He's saying, well, he's the true author, and putting himself aside. Then we go into the greatness of the teachings, how the Lam Rim should be studied and taught, and how to rely on a spiritual teacher. Now, we're not going to cover all that tonight. We'll start with the verses of homage. So this is in, have you, because I looked for copies of the Hymn of Experience apart from the one I've sent around. I couldn't find any in any of our texts here. Remember? It's in the retreat book. It's not in the gold book. And anyway, there's no separate ones. So the Hymn of Experience by Lama Tsongkhapa, first of all, the first 5 verses are verses of homage. So we'll look at those. I'll read them out at least. I bow my head to you, foremost of the Shakyas, whose body is formed by 10 million perfections, virtues, and excellence, whose speech fulfills the hopes of infinite transmigratory beings, whose mind perceives all objects of knowledge. So here we have paying homage to Shakyamuni Buddha, that we have the karma to have a connection with in this life, in this world. Okay, we weren't alive at the time of Shakyamuni Buddha. We didn't hear the teachings directly, but we definitely have that karmic connection. Here we are following the teachings of the Buddha, whose body is formed by 10 million perfections. So this is way beyond, you know, we do contemplations on the 32 major signs and the 80 minor signs of the Buddha, and we learn what each of those represent, and they're all reflections of qualities within ourselves. And then it says 10 million perfections. So that's way beyond all of that. I haven't seen a list of 10 million, but usually that just means not a precise exact number, but unimaginable lot, right? Huge number of, like, limitless perfections, shall we say, whose speech fulfills the hopes of infinite transmigratory beings. So there are teachings yet to have received, have requested, on the 64 eloquent qualities of the Buddha's speech, fulfilling the hopes of infinite transmigratory beings. Of course, we know the capacity of a Buddha to be able to teach exactly in accordance with the needs of the student, the disciple, the being, in their language or at their capacity, according to their preferences, their predispositions, their interests, and so forth, simultaneously. Whose mind perceives all knowable objects of knowledge. So it said that anything that can be known is known by a Buddha. A Buddha knows everything that is to be known. And so if it's not known by a Buddha, it's not knowable. So there are many things that are known by a Buddha that are not known by us. That is easy, right? As Buddha said to Shariputra, only a Buddha knows karma. You know, when the old man who Shariputra thought had no good qualities and requested ordination, and the Buddha, out of his clairvoyance, being able to see the past lives of all sentient beings, their predispositions, tendencies, their karma, everything, could see that in whichever previous lifetime he was that fly on that cow dung, in that cart going around the stupa, or whichever version you've heard. And that even not knowing what a stupa was, but the imprint from that over interceding lives had multiplied, the karmic imprint of that had multiplied the virtue of that. And here he was. Not only was he able to talk to the Buddha directly, he was able to request and gain ordination. So that was some pretty multiplication of karma, wasn't it? So there's many hidden topics. There's many hidden topics in the world. There's many. I remember when some years ago now, when a first female was appointed chief astronomer in Australia, and her area was dark matter and dark space. I don't know what's the difference between dark matter and dark space. And anyway, what's unknown? And she just said, you know, what we know is about 17%. The rest is human ignorance. I went, oh, spoken like a Buddhist. Human ignorance. But we can see within our world, within our lifetime, how many more things have been discovered, you know, if we think of within the universe and, you know, within technology, within different areas. But if we come down to fundamentals, in other words, the workings of the mind, hasn't changed. Hasn't. Yeah. It hasn't. You're agreeing? Yeah, it has not changed one iota. And of course, as the Buddha said, if, you know, if there's anything that you can, that I've said that you can prove wrong, prove it wrong. But if you can't prove it, he doesn't say believe it if you can't prove it. It's just like, well, I'll put it aside for now. And so I got into like reading the sutras and going, okay, when you say there's no one who's got to the bottom of the great ocean, is that true? The deepest ocean, is that true? True? The Marianas Trench, is that the deepest point we've got? Well, maybe we're wrong. And I watched a documentary that had people diving down there, and there was life form. The Buddha had no diving equipment. He had no technologies of what we're used to today to be able to do everything, and yet talked about infinite particles, you know. He knew about, you know, no problem splitting atoms, you know, infinite teeny tiny particles that are still can be divided. Oh, yeah. So the Buddha knows whatever is to be known. I prostrate to Manjushri and Maitreya, whose emanations sport in innumerable universes, assuming the responsibility of all the conqueror's conduct, the Buddha's conduct. You are the supreme sons of the peerless teacher of the Buddha, supreme sons. So we have in our merit field, I always look up to see where it is and I forget. Over there. So right side, Maitreya. Mind you, down here we have left side Maitreya. Right side Maitreya, left side Manjushri or Manjughosha, same. So holding the vast or, you know, extensive deeds, that lineage, bodhicitta, and wisdom lineage. So these two are the holders of those lineages, right? And so when we look at the merit field, which is why we've got this, so you have the charts there, on page 130. It's as you know, it's I find it useful in studying to think now who's in their lineage and who's in their side. So we've got around Buddha Maitreya, Arya Asanga, Vasubandhu, two half brothers, and so forth, and around Buddha Maitreya. Oh, sorry, I said, yeah, Maitreya, and around Manjushri, Manjughosha, Nagarjuna, and Arya Deva. So particularly Nagarjuna and Arya Sangha get focused on here. And so to map out, you know, who's who, at least the ones we hear of and hear commentaries of and where they fit in the lineages. So that's a pictorial description. I quite like also in Ronka Rinpoche, just going through his chart in the indexes, which sort of gets to be the page after 759. So we can say 760, but it hasn't got a number on it. I just think, you know, this is fabulous. It has the same. It has Maitreya there and Manjushri. So it's got Shakyamuni Buddha at the top, and then it's got Maitreya and Manjushri, and then going down the lineage, and then coming down to Lama Atisha, who combines both lineages. And then you have the Kadampa masters, the Gelugpa masters, and the other Lamrim lineage and instruction lineage. And all of that is mapped in that field of merit. And it goes down as far as Trijang Rinpoche. So I just find this fabulous. I think that's a bit easier than it's easier to connect who's who in a, what do you call it? I was going to say genealogical order. That's not right. Chronological order. Chronological order. In, you know, who passed down to who, Manjushri to Nagarjuna to Chandrakirti and so forth and so forth. So in this one, for example, on the vast lineage, the profound lineage, no, sort of not the vast lineage. So you've got here at the end Siddhvana Dvipa, which is Salingpa, where at Lama Atisha got all the body ornament, Maitreya's teachings, the bodhicitta teachings, 12 years. And from his teacher, Avadutta, he got all the teachings from Nagarjuna on the profound view. And so you're able to start putting it all together. So I find that very, very helpful. Because we hear all these names and we don't know sort of quite where they belong. They're in there somewhere. So I prostrate to Manjushri Maitreya, whose emanations sport and, yes, the supreme sons of the peerless teachers. So we say Buddha Maitreya, Buddha Manjushri. I prostrate at the feet of Nagarjuna and Asanga. So here we come down from Maitreya to Asanga and from Manjushri to Nagarjuna, ornaments of Jambudvipa. So we talk about in the 17 Nalanda masters tradition that there are 6 ornaments, 2 of which are Nagarjuna and Asanga, amongst those 17 pandits, the great pandits of Nalanda. So Nagarjuna was in the 2nd century, and mostly we know, and particularly in his holiness teachings, frequently will refer to the fundamental wisdom of the middle way and particular verses in pretty much all his teachings. Do I dare say all his teachings? And so he was at Nalanda in the 2nd century. So you think Nalanda University was really the first university full stop established in the world. And His Holiness mission these days is to revive the, particularly Nagarjuna's teachings. You know, he's saying to the Indian scholars, academics, this is your history, this is your lineage, this is your legacy. You've got to preserve these teachings and revive these teachings. So the root of Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and then you've got Chandrakirti's commentary entering the middle way on that. But anyway, so he's prostrating to Nagarjuna and Arya Asanga, who was in the 4th century. So as I mentioned before, you know, that Maitreya took him to Tushita heaven, gave him the transmission of all the teachings on bodhicitta, and then he returned, and then he passed on those transmissions. So that, and this was where Lama Atisha drew those both together. So some of those texts we, like in our basic program, we study the ornament of clear realization, just one chapter, in the master's program, the whole thing, and sublime continuum. So we have quite a number of Maitreya's texts that we study, not to mention Nagarjuna. So we can say this is all part of our lineage. And why I'm mentioning this is because we need to be able to track back that lineage and say, yes, these are authentic teachings from the Buddha. And we hear our teachers saying that to us, you know, teachings have come from, you know, my teacher, like Lama Zopa might say from Trijang Rinpoche, and then he received from, say, Pabonka Rinpoche and so forth. So that we, in other words, it's telling us it's an authentic tradition and that we can trust and have great, not only respect, but we can have great faith in those teachings. They are valid teachings. Well, not only valid, they come out of profound realizations. Oh, what time are we finishing? About 10 minutes. Okay. So, so generally what's presented next is looking at the qualities of the teacher. And here we're talking about the qualities of the author, Lama Atisha, of the author of The Lamp of the Path to Enlightenment. And as I mentioned earlier, Lama Tsongkhapa attributes his own authorship or composition of the great treatise on the path to enlightenment to Lama Atisha. So generally, different qualities are looked for in terms of looking at these lineage lamas. And so one thing is taking rebirth in an excellent lineage. So he was born into a royal family. He was one of 3 sons. He, from 3 years old, he was exceptionally bright. From then onwards, trained, excelled in logic, beat all of the non-Buddhist scholars. And he, by the age of 15, could beat all the scholars. I think that's like His Holiness the Dalai Lama at the age of 15, getting his Geshe degree. And so he continued to grow and do those studies. He also ordained at a young age. So originally he was studying, and his parents didn't want him to ordain. And then and they kept refusing. You know, it's a typical thing of, no, we want you to go into the family business. You want to go off and ordain. Anyway, so it took quite some time. He went away and studied and became a great scholar. He studied all the sutra and tantra, and each one of his teachers would send him to another teacher to get different teachings. And he'd spend years and years and years with each of the teachers. And so he was at Vikramashila as a teacher. He was ended up a renowned teacher in India. Anyway, eventually his family relinquished, he got ordained, and then he became a renowned teacher in India. And he was actually, he had the dream, kept having dreams hearing conversations. Like he was at Bodh Gaya and he heard these statues talking to each other and saying, you know, what's the way to get enlightenment? What's the quickest way to enlightenment? And the quickest way to enlightenment is bodhicitta. And he kept hearing these things over and over again. And so that's when he ended up going to Indonesia to get the teachings with Sulimpa, all of Maitreya's teachings when he arrived there. And of course, he didn't immediately go straight to Lama Sulimpa, even it taken, 13 months by boat and, sickness and so forth. He hung out with the students of Lama Sulimpa and grilled them on Lama Sulimpa's qualities. And so then eventually he was introduced to Lama Sulimpa, and Lama Sulimpa was going, what you're asking is going to take years and years and years. And he says, yep, I'm up for it, 12 years. So he received all of that transmission in Indonesia and then came back to India. And subsequently was asked to go to Tibet. So we have, we won't talk about the whole long story of Tibet just at the moment. So Might carry that over to next week. So you could see his qualities in terms of being of a good family. Doesn't mean you have to be of a royal family. A good family is a family that upholds good values. They don't have to be wealthy, but they have to, you know, well, I guess you're aspiring to Buddhahood. You want to be supported in that. If you think about, you know, when families go against people's desire to do that, and it gets difficult. I know when we go to ordain, it's like, well, are your family against it? And just like some of us, the age we're at, it's really like, does anyone care? Of course, you know, my parents were delighted, and you know, my family, if they weren't delighted, they didn't say it, so that's all right. So with Lama Atisha, basically he showed from a very early age that he had no interest in anything, attachment to anything of this life. And so he was only preoccupied with wanting to study the paths and grounds of all the teachings of the Buddha and to have that thorough knowledge. And his only interest was, you know, finding the best teachers, which he did. Yeah. How are we going, folks? Okay. All right, shall we leave it there then? Unless anybody has any comments, questions, so forth.
Teachings from Sangha.
Yeah.
Got from the trial. Then they split into the 7 causes.
Oh no! Oh yeah.
Or was that evolved later?
That evolved later with Shantideva. Well, it's not so much that they evolve. So a Sangha mainly focused on the 7-point cause and effect. And part of that is said that the equalizing and exchanging self with others was a harder technique. So in terms of seeing who's ready for what technique, is a 7-point cause and effect result. And yeah, it was just that Shantideva, it wasn't that he discovered it, it was that he more elaborated on the equalizing, exchanging self for others. Because then we have the combination of the two, the 11 points is the combination of the two. Yeah. You sort of bring it back together. Yeah. Yeah. But also interesting, like, because we talk about Maitreya's ornament of clear realization, which is really on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, right? So that's, so it's quite interesting to see. It's not exactly always delineated in that way. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we can dedicate. Ewadi nyududa lama sange tribgune drowa chikyam malupa de sala gopa sho jantrip sencho grimposhe makye panam ge kuchi yewa nyampa me payang gong ne gong de pelwa sho. Long life prayers. Jikten kamdi pende malupa kangle shungwe samperi jino kadrin sume tenzin yatsola sowa debso tuje lundrup sho. 22. Tu su shang shin jam gun gawe tenzin gyom pelwe konzo dupoze. Choksum ko wele mon tu dro pada sodo she gondro japtin shuk. Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the dispositions of the vows to be subdued,
makes clear in light of your well-spoken advice the sacred Ganden tradition, essence of Buddha's teachings. O foremost and holy Lama, to you who are supreme. O Lama, please, please live long. Thank you.